The entire Kumano Kodo is just absolutely full of amazing history. People have been walking this particular pilgrimage for more than 1,000 years, I think for 1,200 years or something like that. You can imagine that the same steps that you are taking have been taken by thousands of other pilgrims thousands of years ago. Luckily for this particular trip to Japan, it was myself and my boyfriend and two of our friends that were all going together. And all of us are very keen on hiking, and we've done quite a lot of hiking in South Africa, but none of us had really done any hiking in Japan. Finton and Neil Marie had never even been to Japan. Unfortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of time allocated in our itinerary to do the Kumano Kodo. So eventually what we decided to do was travel down from Tokyo to Nachi Falls, which is actually traditionally at the end of the Nakahechi route. And then we would walk backwards from Nachi Falls, and that would allow us to do about half of the Nakahechi route. Our entire hike on the Kumano Kodo took us 2 nights and 2 full days of hiking, with a day of travel on either side. We arrived in Katsura quite late, which is fairly close to Nachi Falls, and we took a taxi to our accommodation. And we were all immediately absolutely blown away by how amazing this accommodation was. There was a kotatsu in the middle of the room, which is like a table with a duvet on it and a heating element underneath. And because we'd been running around in the rain a bit, we were pretty cold. So that was absolutely fantastic. There was also a private onsen bath that you could use, and that was just phenomenal after running around in the rain. And the food was spectacular. It really set the bar very, very high for the rest of the places we stayed at. So the next morning we woke up reasonably early and had a very delicious breakfast, and then decided to start our hike. And the very first part of our hike, because we're going backwards, was past this pagoda that overlooks Nachi Falls, and it has a lot of spiritual significance, that entire compound around the pagoda. But we didn't spend too much time looking around, although the gardens and the buildings were absolutely beautiful, because we were slightly concerned about the amount of time that we had to get to our next stop for the night, which was Koguchi. We knew that there was going to be quite a lot of elevation gain, and right away, as soon as we left the pagoda, we just started going up unending stairs. Luckily, the vegetation and the scenery was spectacularly pretty, and it really did help quite a lot to keep our minds off our burning leg muscles. Eventually, we topped out in an area with an absolutely stunning view of the surroundings, including being able to look back down through the area that we had just traveled through the day before on our way to Nachi Falls and the coast. That initial mountain near Nachi Falls had a very sort of playful, childlike quality to it, even though it was so steep and difficult to climb. We were all having a very good time. It was quite interesting for all of us experiencing Japan in winter, because even in winter, Japan is so green and lush. In South Africa, it's much browner, and we don't have as many massive forested areas as Japan does. And we had seen that coming up along our route was a little rest station near some remains of a tea house from long ago. Anyway, we got to the remains of this tea house and it had a little sitting area, but the thing that all of us were instantly most interested in was a vending machine that was there right next to the tea house remains, which sold hot coffee and cans of hot corn soup, as well as other drinks like tea and fruit juice and Coke. Right after those tea house remains, we actually hit the first detour of our route. And this does happen sometimes on the Kumano Kodo because obviously it's a mountainous region. What sometimes happens is there's a landslide or a rock fall or some other problem on the trail so that people can't walk there. And it did add a slight amount of distance to our hike. Luckily, we did manage to get to Koguchi well in time for our accommodation, and the owner of this particular accommodation was so welcoming and friendly. We again had a really nice bath and then took a look at our weather app on our phone, which unfortunately told us that the entire next day would just be rain from start to finish. So the next morning when we woke up, we were mentally prepared for getting wet. And we did. It was raining when we left, and it never let up the entire day long. And it was a really tough day. By the end of it, we were all quite broken. There was the final hill to Yunomene Onsen was really tough. We were all in a pretty dark place, except for Ralph, who seemed to be thriving on the adversity. He was dancing ahead up the trail. But when we finally got to the top of that hill and started heading down towards Yunomene Onsen, you can start to smell the sulfur from the hot springs because that entire little town is a hot spring town, complete with a river that is hot flowing through it. And we that night stayed in a backpackers called J Hoppers. And that unfortunately was the end of our Kumano Kodo trip. I do wish that I'd been able to spend more time on the Kumano Kodo because it is just such an incredible hike. It's got a paved path with steps on it and it's very well signposted. And that might lead you to believe that it's a really easy hike, and it is definitely not. When the trail goes up a mountain, it just goes directly up a mountain with no switchbacks or any sort of respite. There's a whole network of trails, and I desperately want to go and try all of them. That entire area is just magnificently beautiful. My advice if you want to do the Kumano Kodo is definitely do research beforehand. Go and read through all of the information that is available on the tourism website, and I'll put links in the video description to all of this stuff as well. Because you can't just really wing it. You have to book your accommodation beforehand, and you need to be a bit sensible about where you book your accommodation. If you make it too far away in terms of kilometers, then you won't be able to get there before nightfall. And you should remember that there are a lot of options for the Kumano Kodo. You don't have to hike it as a religious pilgrimage. You don't have to hike it in a certain direction. You don't have to do the Nakahechi route. You can do any one of the other routes. I am definitely not an expert in anything to do with Japan or the Kumano Kodo, and I'm putting this video up from the perspective of a tourist going to Japan. So please, if you have suggestions for a better option for some of the things I've mentioned, or if you notice something that's incorrect in the video, then please just put a comment down below so that other people can learn as well.